Hello again. If there is one thing which everybody in the United Kingdom can agree upon, it is that the National Health Service is the most wonderful institution ever devised by human minds, and that every other country in the world must be insanely jealous of the British for coming up with such a marvellous idea. This uncritical admiration is especially strong in left-wing Guardian reading types, who are constantly in a panic because they believe that this or that government policy must, inevitably, lead to the appalling prospect of the NHS being privatised by the back door. Although we seldom think of it in those terms, Britain's National Health Service is nothing more than a nationalised industry, a state monopoly run by the government for the supposed benefit of ordinary citizens. Like all nationalised enterprises, it tends to be horribly inefficient and burdened down with a bloated bureaucracy. That's really in the nature of state monopolies, and despite the fact that one can technically pay privately for medical treatment, for the vast majority of the population it's the NHS or nothing. I'm old enough to remember when there were other government monopolies, even on things like cookers and telephones. If one wanted a cooker in the 1950s and 1960s, one had to go to a state showroom and choose a government-approved cooker. A state employee would then install it for you. The only place one could buy cookers was at the electricity or gas board showrooms. It was the same with telephones. Anybody wanting a telephone would have to go in person to a government office and be interviewed there. They would then be put on the waiting list, which was about 6 months. Telecommunications were a strictly guarded government monopoly in those days. All this was, of course, very slow, cumbersome and inefficient, and things are much better now that cookers and telephones are not controlled entirely by the state. If I want to buy a cooker, I can buy one anywhere and get anybody to install it for me. I don't have to buy a cooker from the government. In the same way, if I want a telephone, I don't necessarily have to use the government agency, BT. Few people do these days. Surely, though, the NHS is different. We might be able to have a free market in telephones, but that wouldn't work with medicine, would it? What would privatisation look like in that context? It's easy enough to see how privatisation would work for the National Health Service because it has already begun, for which I, for one, am heartily thankful. A couple of years ago, I decided to have the flu vaccine. Getting through to the surgery meant ringing at 8 in the morning and being put in a queue. It took half an hour to speak to a receptionist, who told me that they'd run out and couldn't help me and to ring the following week, but no promises, mind. The next week I rang and was told that they'd just had a consignment of the vaccine in, but I'd have to come that very day, otherwise I'd need to ring again the following week. It wasn't convenient that day, but the day after I was passing Boots, the high street chemist, and they had a notice in the window offering flu jabs. I went in to inquire and was told they could do it immediately. No speaking to surly receptionists, no delays, no running out of vaccines, just prompt, efficient service geared to my needs. Within 2 minutes, I was back on the street, having had the vaccine. You see, this is an example of privatisation. The scheme was being paid for by my national insurance contributions, but instead of an army of clerks running it, there was a commercial venture, a chain of shops which depended for its very existence upon satisfying customers and giving them what they wanted. This made them efficient. I'm sure that some people have noticed when speaking to the receptionists in doctors' surgeries that they have a very curt way with them and a take it or leave it tone. They know perfectly well they're not like a shop, they're not a commercial enterprise. We can't really do without them. If a shopkeeper is unpleasant to you, you can simply walk out and go to another shop. It's not that easy when you're dealing with the NHS. You have to put up with what the staff give to you. Another example of the advantages of privatisation in the NHS cropped up this very week. I would like to know what my blood pressure is. I'd like a trained person to take it and tell me the result. Imagine ringing my doctor and trying to have a simple procedure like that arranged. For one thing, they won't even open the door to patients at the moment. For another, it's urgent cases only. There's certainly no time there for taking the blood pressure of a healthy person who isn't ill. Luckily, a new scheme is being launched soon in which high street chemists will take the blood pressure of people over 40 and tell them the results. I give a link in the description to this video to a news item about this. Once again, our national insurance contributions are being used not to employ receptionists and clerical workers who sometimes make our lives more difficult trying to gain access to medical care, but simply to provide us with a very useful service which has been contracted out to commercial companies. This is brilliant news. We're so hypnotised in Britain by our regard for the NHS that we seldom stop to ask ourselves if there might be a better way of providing free health care rather than through a state bureaucracy. Other countries, especially those in Europe, manage to provide health care for their citizens without the giant nationwide concern directed from the capital